Hello everybody, welcome to another video. Today is the 17th of August. Today we're going to be doing a full frontline update. But before I begin, I want to thank everybody for helping me reach 30,000 subscribers. That number is crazy. Imagine that, 30,000. Well, I'm only getting started from here, so just thank you guys so much for this, and I'm just going to continue from here. So let's get into the update. Starting out with Kherson, and then we're going to go to Robotyne, and we're going to work our way to the east and to the north. Beginning with Kherson, there is a lot of ambiguity in this region. And by the way, I did hide the units because the units are sort of cluttering the map. But if you want to turn it back on, and you just click on this. And then I could also click on the fortification map so you can see all the fortifications that the Russians have set up. But just to give an idea of the situation around Kherson, specifically around Kozachi Lahari, it is very ambiguous because we did hear a lot about the fighting over here for about a week, and now we're hearing less and less reports coming out about the direct situation within the town of Kozachi Lahari itself. What I will say is that it's very hard to pinpoint the exact front line because this is probably the most fluid front out of the entire war, due to the fact that you have these Ukrainian DRGs that are sending their forces with speedboats across the Dnieper River. They're taking up positions in some of these islands, like this one over here, and in some of the dachas. And then, sometimes they withdraw at night. Sometimes they advance forward towards a certain strong point and then withdraw back. So it's very hard to get a permanent idea of where the Ukrainian line is and where the Russian line is. But what I'll say is that as of August 15th, there were Russian sources, and not just one, but many of them, that were saying that they were able to push the Ukrainians out of their bridgehead around Kozachi Lahari. Now, what does that mean? Well, from the maps that I saw circulating from the Russian sources, what they mean by the bridgehead, the Kozachi Lahari bridgehead, is actually the bridgehead not across the Dnieper River, but across the Konka River. The Konka River is over here. You can see it runs through. So the Ukrainian bridgehead across the Konka River would be in this area over here, where the rectangle is located. So what they're alleging is that the Russians, after days of heavy fighting in this area, were able to first push out the Ukrainians from the northwestern corner of Kozachi Lahari, which would be over here, and then were able to push the Ukrainians out entirely from the bridgehead to the south of the Konka River. But this implies that the Ukrainians still have control of the island that is to the south of the Dnieper River, which is over here, where you see I have all these rectangles marked. And so that's still a base of Ukrainian operation. It's on a floodplain. There's some shrubbery over there, so you could send DRGs to be stationed over there. So this is certainly not the end of the Ukrainian bridgehead, even if the Russian sources are correct, because the Ukrainian DRGs will still be able to cross over the Konka River. It's just that if the Russians were correct, that this was a relatively minor setback. But we don't know if the Russian claims are true because there's no geolocated footage of Ukraine being pushed out. But on the flip side, I haven't really seen any geolocated footage to prove that Ukraine has taken over Kozachi Lahari, or that they're even in the town or village itself at the moment. What the claim was is that they were fighting in the northwestern corner. Really, after days of fighting in the area, you would expect to see some sort of confirmation, some sort of video from that region of fighting within the village. So really, the best we could say is that the Ukrainians are probably still south of Konka River, maybe a bit farther away from the town Kozachi Lahari, maybe in this area over here, and that the fortifications and the fields in between Kozachi Lahari and the bridgehead are a gray zone, because you really don't want to be in an open area like a field that's isolated from some of your main concentrations, your troop concentrations, in such a hotly contested area. So that's at least my take on the situation, but it could obviously fluctuate as time goes on. But before I end this section of the video, I do want to mention that Russian sources still do agree that the Ukrainians have the bridgehead across the Antonovsky Bridge, and the Russians have been trying to dislodge them from here for a while. Recently, we've been seeing more Fab 500 strikes. We're seeing drone strikes on the bridgehead, not just on the Antonovsky Bridgehead, but also on the one across the Konka River over here. Even as the Ukrainian intensity of their attacks across the Dnieper River over the past few days have not died down, but has certainly decreased compared to what it was a week ago. We are still seeing artillery duels across the river. We're seeing mortar duels across the river. We're still seeing DRGs crossing over the river at night. And there's Russian attempts every single day at stopping these DRGs from crossing. So that leads to some heavy fighting. But what I'll say is that it has decreased, but this is probably not permanent because we're seeing the movement of equipment, especially a lot of speedboats from Mykolaiv towards the front line in Kherson. So what that means is that Ukrainians probably do plan on increasing the intensity at some point in the near future across the river, both near Kozachi Lahori, also across Dachi and Antonovsky Bridge. So I'll have to wait and see about that. Now, moving on to the Battle of Robotyne, the situation here has really increased in intensity. We're seeing a lot more Ukrainian attempted assaults at the town and to the east of the town. So just to break down what's been going on around Robotyne for the past 2 days, starting around noon of August 15th, you had units from the 46th Air Assault Brigade, the 118th Mechanized Brigade, and the 15th Karadag National Guard Brigade. So I'll show, here's 46th. This is an Air Assault Brigade, a part of the Maroon Tactical Group, which is one of the tactical groupings, like equivalent to one of the Army Corps. And it has previously been in reserve, and it was moved in recently to the front line. So there's additional units that I'm going to get to, such as the 82nd, that I'm going to talk about that were moved in. But just for now, to focus on the first assault, you had 46th Air Assault Brigade, 118th Mechanized Brigade, which is a part of the 10th Army Corps. So it's one of those newer units that was founded in 2023. And then you had National Guard unit over here, 15th Karadag Brigade. So they were involved in assaults towards Robotyne from the north. There was a new wave, and we basically, what we saw is attacks through the hedgerows into the northern outskirts of Robotyne. Basically, what we've been seeing for many weeks now, and usually these assaults through the hedgerows into the northern outskirts of Robotyne. You could see, first of all, the trenches over there, so it's a fortified area, and that's part of why it's so difficult for the Ukrainians to break through. But it does seem like the Russians have been forced to retreat from their trenches in this area, from the northern outskirts, due to the intensity of the Ukrainian waves. They are now retreating to the center of the town to more favorable positions after basically finding out, due to the circumstances, that it was very untenable to hold those northern positions due to an increase in casualties and due to the increase in the Ukrainian intensity of their assaults. And what we're seeing here is that usually on the northern outskirts, the Ukrainians are using these infantry groups, not really mechanized, and they're usually very small groups. And then on the eastern flank of Robotyne, that's where you see more of the mechanized columns using the Western equipment. And that is a combination of what we saw starting on the noon of August 15th. So with this increase of pressure, it really did indicate that the Ukrainians were about to start a new wave of assaults, very similar to what we all called the main thrust. That's what New York Times called it, for instance. That was the main thrust about 2 weeks ago, trying to take Robotyne. That assault by the Ukrainians was not able to take Robotyne. They were not able to enter the town. What they were able to do is establish positions in some of the fields and afforestations to the east of Robotyne, which sort of gave them the springboard to launch this most recent attack. And to aid the Ukrainians with this most recent attack onto Robotyne, but also onto the eastern flank, because the eastern flank is equally, if not more important than Robotyne, because look at it. All these fields over here that I'm gonna show in this blue rectangle, you can see that they're relatively open. There's no trenches in this area until you reach the first line of Russian defense. So that's the Ukrainian goal all in all. It's to flank Robotyne, and it's to reach Novopokrovka or Novoprokopivka and break through the first line of defense, because that's basically the crux of the entire Ukrainian counteroffensive, to overrun these Russian defensive lines and reach the Sea of Azov. Although now it seems like it's more of a local goal of at least breaking through the first line of defense. And it seems like the best vector of doing that is through an area that is more open, that is less fortified. And the eastern flank of Robotyne seems to be the vector that Ukraine is aiming for. So to aid them with this operation, the Ukrainians have moved in the sister brigade of the 46th Air Assault Brigade, which is also in the Maroon Tactical Group, the 82nd Air Assault Brigade. This is a brigade that was previously in reserve, but it has about 2,000 men, and it has a lot of the Western equipment that has not been used yet. It has 14 Challenger 2 British main battle tanks, and there was an article where the Ukrainians actually posted a video of their Challenger 2 on the front line. It had a cope cage, so those are meant to stop drones. Both sides use it, but in that was basically confirmation that Challenger 2s were starting to be used on the front line. But this brigade also has what appears to be 90 Striker armored fighting vehicles. Now the thing is, I don't know if it's 90 Striker armored fighting vehicles for all of Ukraine or just for this brigade, because I know that at the beginning of 2023, 90 Strikers were shipped, but I don't know if all 90 of those were allotted to the 82nd, because I'm seeing the two claims conflated by the media. So I have to wait for confirmation on that. But they also have these Marder infantry fighting vehicles and American M109 self-propelled howitzers. So they do have a lot of the newer Western equipment that's been moved to Ukraine that's previously not been used. And the reason why is because it was being held out for a new attack on the Russian lines, because they didn't want to throw in everything at once, lest that it fail, and then they would have nothing to fall back on. So this is sort of their fallback. This is sort of one of their last options. They do have some other units in reserve, which I'll talk about more in depth in a later video. But this is one of their main units that was not being used previously, and now it's being committed. And it's being committed, we know this based on footage that was released by Russians on the eastern flank of Robotyne over the past 2 days. We have videos that I'll try to mark over here. I'll try to show them to you. Here, first Marder spotted on the battlefield. The Russians were trying to claim that the Marder got destroyed, but there's no indication of this from what I saw. It seems like it was just not moving at that point, but there's no signs of destruction. Let's also look here. Here's a Lancet strike on a Striker armored fighting vehicle, and of course from this 82nd Brigade. This was the first confirmation that the Striker was being used on the fields east of Robotyne, very similar to how we saw these Bradleys being used to the east of Robotyne, and many of them were destroyed. About a third of what was given to them by the Americans. And here you can see the Lancet hit it, but we don't know if the Striker got destroyed. The Russians are claiming that since the implementation or the usage of the Strikers 2 days ago, that 3 of them have been destroyed. And I did see the footage that was posted by the Russians, but in that video, they only show 1 Striker being hit. So they just showed multiple different angles of the same Striker and then claimed that it was 3 being destroyed. So unless there's additional footage out there that I haven't seen, it seems like there's only 1 that's been destroyed so far. And then this is older one about Bradley. But regardless, now you're seeing the movement of new units. The 82nd hasn't fully been committed to the front line. It's already in the Orikhiv axis, but not all of its elements have started attacking yet. So we're going to have to see that sort of play out over the next few days and see how the Ukrainians are able to advance, if they even are, and how the Russians are going to be able to defend the new intensity of these Ukrainian attacks. Also, we're seeing an increase in troop concentrations in Malotokmachka, and this could imply that perhaps the Ukrainians want to attack in the direction of Novopokrovka, which is another town on the front line that does have fortifications, but really not anything similar to like Verbove, for instance. Verbove is extremely fortified, so it seems like a safer option than assaulting Verbove head-on, which the Ukrainians actually did try to do in their main push, and it failed. So let's say they're able to take over Novopokrovka. The goal would be to flank Verbove from the north as they also attack the open fields east of Robotyne, and then to do this two-pronged attack to break through the first defensive line and take over Verbove, which is an important local defensive stronghold for the Russians. Has a lot of troops and defenses centered around there. It also has a lot of roads that are sort of, it's like a junction of roads that are all feeding out of it towards other important towns in the region. So that would be the significance of Verbove. But we're going to have to wait and see if the Ukrainians go through with that. Now the thing is, this Ukrainian assault, if it does pan out to be at the same intensity of the main push that we saw like 2 weeks ago, if not more, then they're not going to be able to go at it for that long. So for instance, take the Ukrainian assaults 2 weeks ago. How long did those last? They didn't last that long. Maybe there was about a week of intense fighting with different brigades being sent in from the 10th Army Corps with Bradleys and all this Western equipment. And then after that, it sort of died down after the initial week of extreme fighting. So it's going to take not that long for the 82nd and 46th to really wear down their initial combat effectiveness before they have to be rotated out and have to be given some time to recuperate before being sent back to the front line. And once they get rotated out, there's not going to be many good units to replace them. A lot of them are going to be territorial defense or National Guard. National Guard is better than TDF. But either way, the firepower intensity will definitely decrease at that point. So in the window of time that the 46th and 82nd Brigade have, where they are still very combat effective and do still have really men and equipment at full capacity. We're gonna have to see them try to push as much as possible, but also in a smart way, not just sending waves and waves at a certain target and just being bombarded by Russian defenses, because that's pretty much what happened in the last main push by the Ukrainians with their Bradleys. There was just so many layers of minefields and other such equipment that it made it very difficult to yield gains. So we're gonna have to see if the Ukrainians are able to overcome that obstacle this time around. And just to give some credit to the Ukrainians, and since the beginning of this news of the 82nd being recommitted or being committed for the first time, we have seen the Russians withdraw from the northern outskirts of Robotyne towards the center. So you have to give them credit for that. You also have to give them credit for being able to push a bit through the eastern fields and take over some new lands over the past 2 days. So I'll just mark what they were able to take. It's basically this area over here with the rectangle. So yeah, credit where credit is due. Now moving on to the situation around Urozhaine. For now, the fighting has decreased in intensity, but we do have official confirmation that Urozhaine is under full Ukrainian control. And this comes from an announcement from the 35th Marine Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The Ukrainians have 4 Marine brigades in this general area around the Mokriali River. 35th, they have also been the unit that announced the capture of Stromayorske, and now they're saying Urozhaine has been captured. They released a compilation video showing a bunch of videos of how the town or village was captured. And this comes a few days after the initial reports that it was captured, so it seems very likely that they were waiting out to complete combing operations in the southern part of the town, and now it does seem likely that they do have full control. And this is not even disputed by Russian sources anymore, I believe. But moving on, due to the fact that the intensity of the fighting has decreased, we're now seeing the movement of more units to the front line as they begin to prepare for the second or the new renewal of attacks in this direction. So you're already seeing the movement of the 128th Territorial Defense Brigade, which is a unit that has been fighting previously but didn't really fight that much around Urozhaine. So they're being moved in, and they're also being moved in with anti-tank systems. They're being moved in with machine guns. In Stromayorske, they're being centered around. There's also mortars that are being moved in from the 1st Tank Brigade. 1st Tank Brigade is important due to the tanks that they have that were used around Urozhaine and will also probably be used around the open fields in this region. And you also have the 31st Mechanized Brigade that has been moved in near Pryutne. So this is 31st. Let me find it. So the movement of the 31st near Pryutne does indicate that the Ukrainians want to try to take it over. And the reason why they want to take it over in the near future would be to cut off any sort of connection between Pryutne and the heights that Russia controls to the basically to the northeast of Pryutne. These heights are very important on a local level because they are on relatively high elevation, about 550 feet above sea level. And then that's first of all higher than Pryutne, but it's also higher than the entire Mokriali River and that entire valley in that region, which is understandable because all those towns are very, very close to a river, and all the roads adjacent to those towns where the Ukrainians are trying to advance through, those are also on a very low elevation. And the Russians at the moment do have positions that are on hills overlooking those roads. So it makes it much harder for the Ukrainians to try to advance when all of them are being funneled in this 1 or 2 specific roads that are all within the field of vision of some of those Russian forces, whether it be with ATGMs or with their own tanks or with their own vehicles or with their own small arms fire, mortars, whatever it may be. And they could fire upon those forces. It's taking a toll on the Ukrainians in terms of casualties. So it does seem like a part of their objective in this region would be to eliminate this threat, and that could be by taking Pryutne. At that point, there would be really no connection between the Russians on the hills to the main Russian defenses, because at the moment, there's not even a road supplying the Russians on these forward positions on this hill. Pryutne is really the only way that they could continue being connected to the main Russian defense. So that's probably a part of their plan by moving in the 31st Mechanized Brigade to take over Pryutne. Also, if we move a bit to the east, the Ukrainian plan would also involve leveling the front line by taking over that salient, and then at that point to probably advance towards Zherebets Bridgehead and to storm Lenivka. Now, something that I've seen mentioned by a lot of really both sides in terms of their analysis is that the Russians or the Ukrainians, they want to approach the Starmlinivka-Kremenchuk line. What is that line? It's a trench line basically that you could see built here near a road. So this is important because it's one of the really last main fortified lines that the Russians have on a local level before reaching the first main defensive line in this region. The first main defensive line is over here. If you scroll down a little, and it's about, let's measure, about 4 or 5 kilometers away from the Starmlinivka-Kremenchuk line. And in between, like in that 5-kilometer area, it's mainly just open fields, and then you have the Makriali River running through that area. So by taking over this trench system over here, basically the Ukrainians would be overrunning really one of the last trench lines before reaching an entirely open area that is relatively undefended at the moment, because most of the Russian concentration of defense is around Starmlinivka and around that general area. So that's a part of Ukraine's plan as well. Maybe a part of their plan is, and again, I don't want people to take anything I say as gospel, more so just speculating at the moment based on what we're seeing. There could be a Ukrainian attempt at going south, taking over these fields, and then taking a detour to the east and flanking Novodonetsk. And that would be in an effort to take over Novodonetsk and Novomayorsk and many of these other towns that are near the front line. I mean, you can see them over here. Towns near the front line that are in between Pavlivka and in between Stormayorsk that are relatively undefended. I haven't seen many reports of Russian defenses in this area, and perhaps the Ukrainians will try to exploit that in order to try to encircle those forces that are actually there, and as a result, force them to withdraw back. And with the towns that I'm talking about include Novodonetsk, Novomayorsk, Shevchenko, all of these frontline towns. But we're going to have to wait and see about that if the Ukrainians even reach that point. But before I end the video, let's move on to the situation around the Zherebets Bridgehead, as I call it. So around the Zherebets Bridgehead, the Russians, they were able to basically push back the Ukrainians from a wedge that they were trying to create. I'll show you guys what I mean by that. So the Ukrainians, once they started counterattacking in this region about 2 weeks ago, I believe, and they took back several towns in the region, they were able to send their forces through a forested patch that is in between Kovalivka and Karmazhianivka. So this is the forest I'm talking about in this blue rectangle over here. This was their forward position, and from there they were trying to assault the Russian forces in Karmazhianivka and Kovalivka that were across the Zherebets River. And these two towns are a big part of Russia's operation, basically across the river. So this was meant as a way to disrupt the entire operation and the entire logistics of the bridgehead in the first place. But now the Russians, after very heavy fighting in this region, were able to basically level the front line, because before it looked like this, and now it looks more like this, where the front line is basically level from Novogorivka all the way to Novovodyane over here. And this is, again, positional. It's not anything that significant, but in terms of the local battlefield, it does relieve some of the pressure off of Karmazhianivka. Also, there were reports that the Russians were able to push back Ukrainian attempted assaults towards Serhivka. So for now, it seems like the lines are pretty stable over here, with neither side being able to make significant gains. But that's all I have for today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.